It's foolish policy.
Okay, any tobacco comment, Mr. Searcy?
Yes. I would support the continuation of tobacco price supports until we develop a comprehensive farm policy in this nation. There's no reason, and there's no moral or ethical reason for us to continue to penalize farmers and at the same time not develop the kind of relief that they need to make the transition from the agrarian economy that they're being ripped from into the urban industrial information economies that they're going to be introduced to as new workers. We cannot continue to waste the resources, the work ethic, the kind of esprit de corps that has developed over generations in these people by suddenly cutting them off and giving them nothing else to do.
Mr. Clement?
Teddy, we now have less than 3% of our population are farmers. We've got to do more for the farmers, tobacco farmers and other farmers. What they're looking for is stability of prices. They're looking for new markets overseas that they lost when the Russians or Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and drove up the price supports. Not their fault, our fault. They're concerned about the tobacco allotments that was mentioned, about the cuts, and they have a right to. It's not a subsidy. I surely agree with that. The farmer really needs our help and support, and we're not giving that farmer the help and support that they need. And about the pesticides from this imported tobacco, we don't know what's in that tobacco from overseas, and yet all this imported tobacco keeps coming into the United States that we don't know anything about, and the farmer's being hurt that much more.
All right. Sandra?
Ms. Eskind, to stay on that line of questioning, should Congress enact laws then banning smoking on airlines and federal buildings, etc.?
I think Congress ought to be slow to legislate private and personal decisions for people, and I would not support that kind of. I'm not a smoker. I don't want to smoke, and I don't want to smoke somebody else's smoke. I don't want to inhale somebody else's smoke. But I'm reluctant to suggest that Congress legislate personal and private decisions for people.
Mr. Searcy?
I, too, am generally comfortable with the balance that our society has struck between the necessary accommodation for smokers and non-smokers. I, too, am a non-smoker. However, I did smoke for 17 years. That's one of the reasons why I don't smoke now. I got tired of my children calling me ashtray mouth, so I'm sensitive to that. But I am comfortable with the way things exist now, and unless the balance between the public interest shifts manifestly, I'd be willing to leave it there. I'm not then inclined at this point to intervene federally.
Mr. Clement?
About the...
Smoking on airlines and in federal buildings?
Okay. Well, about smoking on the airlines, I was making notes from various of it about not smoking at all on the airlines.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll get it straight in a minute. I'm not sure I've got a feeling one way or the other. I could argue that probably both ways, and I do think there should be parts of the airline that ought to be set aside for smoking and others set aside for non-smoking.
Like outside the airplane?
Right, maybe something like that. Hang them out the window.
Mr. Bredesen, and quickly, please.
I think that the current balance we've struck is adequate. Many companies have chosen one way, many another. The idea of having areas which are designated non-smoking for the protection of people who don't want makes sense to me. I think it's being done in most areas now.
Thank you. We have come to the conclusion of the first hour of debate. After our break, we'll be back with questions from the audience. Thank you.
Since you live in Middle Tennessee, you know that this is a very special community. It's a community with a heart. On a per capita basis, charitable giving in Middle Tennessee compares well with other areas across the country. I'm asking that you add Channel 8 to your list of organizations to support. Our need has never been greater, and you'll see the results of your contribution each time you tune to Channel 8. Your membership dollars are a sound investment. The dividends? Over 5,000 hours of quality entertainment and information each year. You can actually see your investment. Even if you don't watch Channel 8 every hour, it's worth your time and money just to know Channel 8 is here. Please, take just a moment and write out your check to support Channel 8 during the December Quiet campaign. Your check should be mailed to WDCN, Box 120609, Nashville 37212. Support your community. Support Channel 8.
I'm Bob Laughlin with Tennessee Hospital Association. Congratulations, Nashville, on 25 years of support to your public television station. Happy birthday, WDCN. 25 and counting.
We are back now for the second half of the debate of the congressional candidates running for the 5th District seat. The election, the primary election, of course, is December the 3rd. Now, this is a little bit different. I don't believe the League of Women Voters have ever incorporated this facet into their forum before. We're going to take questions from our audience, people who are interested in specific areas of interest. They can address their question to either candidate, but each candidate will have the opportunity to answer the question. Would you mind standing up? And this is Dana Pride, who is with Parents for Public Education. Dana, what's your question?
Do I hold this?
No, I'll hold it.
Mr. Clement, we'll start with you. Both the Gallup polls conducted nationwide and local public opinion polls find that parents of children currently in public schools rate the schools much more favorably than non-parents or parents whose children are in private schools. In your opinion, why do you think the three groups rate the schools differently, and which view is correct?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that the public school system has taken the route. And, you know, there's a place for public and private school systems, and we have a lot of good public and private in the state of Tennessee. I don't think there's any doubt we do have a mandatory requirement, obligation to support our public schools. But naturally, people do have a choice today. All I can say is I think there's a lot of interest now in improving the public school system, because we don't want just this so-called haves and have-nots approach in our public school system, and we need to do everything we can to improve our public school system. And I really appreciate the 5,000 school teachers endorsing the Bob Clement for Congress campaign, and I'm totally committed to assist them every way I know how on the federal level and work very closely with the state and local officials.
I think first of all, there's some selection going on there that people who do not like the public schools for some reason are placing their children in private schools, and thereby changing the numbers between the two. I hope that part of that is what I think may be happening, that the public school systems are actually considerably better than their reputation is today, and that people who have children in them are finding that to be the case. I think there are many things that need to be done with education in this country, as you well know from what I've been talking about during this race. Mr. Clement, I might add, also should certainly be proud of his endorsement from the TEA, but I think it's unfair to say that it comes from 5,000 teachers. It's something which came from a board, was never voted on by them, and I've found a great many teachers out in the community who have been very supportive of the kinds of programs that I've been proposing.
All right, Mrs. Eskind.
Being a product of the public schools, being the child of public school students and the parent of public school students, I am a public school advocate, and I have only good things to say about the public school system. I'm proud of my children's achievements. I'm frankly proud of mine. And I think that we give schools a bum rap, and I think we're not fair. I think we don't understand that the value of a public school education. I think it is terribly important. What my children are better for their public school education, and while I think there is a role for private education. It's not one that I opted for my children.
Mr. Searcy?
Yes, you're preaching to the choir on this one, essentially. I have 2 children who currently attend Metro Public Schools, so I would be in the group that is favorably disposed to public schools, and therefore I'd also be in the group that says those people who are favorably disposed have the right opinion about public schools. Everything that my children do reinforces that. Everything that I get back from the teachers and from the quality of instruction and from the administrators at Hume Fogg Magnet School and at Aiken School reinforces that notion and my view of that. I don't think that's going to change, so that's what I believe about that. I do know that public education ultimately is the superior form of education because it's the most efficient way to utilize community resources to educate the largest number of students. Furthermore, as many of our students as we have mainstreamed in the entire process, the high students and the low students actually benefit from the interaction with one another.
Okay, I think the rules permit me to ask a question as well, and I would like to get back to this question of education. I think there's a clear difference between Bob Clement and Phil Bredesen on one of the education issues. Standardization and core curriculum in education. Mr. Clement, I believe you said here today that you don't want the Eastern, did you say the liberals?
I said the Eastern establishment.
Eastern establishment.
Washington, D.C. dictating what we're going to teach in Tennessee.
Teaching how we're going to teach in Tennessee. You think it can be handled best on a local level.
Yeah.
Because of that distinction, I'd like to ask Mrs. Eskind and Mr. Searcy if they believe in a core curriculum and standardization, or what side of this do you come down on? First, Ms. Eskind.
On this particular discussion, I do not think that we need a national school board. I do not think we need a national board of education. I do not have any quarrel with the quality of education that my children got in the public school system. I think education is a state matter, not a federal matter. I think the role of the federal government is to establish policies, priorities, but not to superimpose upon the local school system how they educate children.
All right, Mr. Searcy, any position on that specific area?
Yes. Mr. Bredesen and I actually debated this on yesterday, and we talked about standardized testing and core curriculum. And I'm vehemently opposed to either one. And I do agree that the federal government clearly has a role in setting the tone for our educational process, bringing together the resources necessary to provide the kind of expertise necessary overall so that we do more or less get the same quality of instruction from state to state. But we certainly do not need the imposition of such curriculum in any particular state. I dare say that culturally, I think the music of the Oak Ridge Boys is as good as the Boston Pops, and that's the way it ought to be.
All right, let me apprise the candidates of the organizations that are here today, just for your information. Representatives from the Parents for Public Education, Nashville Youth Network, the Junior League, MANA, American Association of University Women, Nashville Association of Negro Businesswomen, the Farm Bureau, Tennessee Hunger Coalition, NOW, Union Hill Neighborhood Coalition, and the League of Women Voters. And Elizabeth Wright is with the Nashville Youth Network. Elizabeth?
This is addressed to all the candidates. Considering the recent chaos in the stock market, what do you propose to bring confidence back to the fiscal policies of the United States?
Who would you like to go first?
Mr. Clement.
We have seen a lot of volatility in the stock market recently. Part of it was corrections that maybe were overly due. Also, I think the stock market sure responded because of the budget deficits that we talked about earlier, that we must move toward balancing the budget, and now President and Congress has got an approach together whereby we can balance the budget within a 6-year period. We know we can't balance the budget in 1 year or it would cause economic havoc. I think another area would be trade deficits. Last year we had $170 billion of trade deficits. Half of that was responsible because of 3 countries, and that was Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And we want to open up our markets, but we want them to open their markets to us. That's vitally important in order for us to not keep suffering these trade deficits which are costing us many jobs that we're losing overseas.
Okay, Mr. Bredesen, you're next on that.
The volatility in the stock market in particular, I think, sent some shockwaves through this country. Some of that, I think, was unjustified, that some of that volatility was due to program trading and similar kind of activities in the market, which are something new to the market and which really hasn't been, the markets have not adjusted for, have not kept up with the demands of that. I think having said that, though, there clearly is a great deal of concern about some of the fundamentals of the economics of this country. The deficit problem that we have, we don't seem to be making enormous headway in getting solved. The deficit in October was $31 billion, which is substantially higher than it was October a year ago. Our trade deficit continues to increase. We have a trade bill before Congress that I support that I think helps that in some ways through getting rid of some of the unfair practices which are damaging us. But we have a lot of getting of our economic house in order to do, I think, in the next 10 years.
Ms. Eskind?
I think most of us are going to agree on the answers to this. I agree that in the past year, stock prices rose tremendously and spiraled in huge amounts, and I think that they rose without any foundation to justify the increases in the prices. I think that one of the things we need to do as a nation is to demand fair trading practices with our trading partners in order to stabilize the twin deficits that are hounding our economy. And I think if we do that, then we will restore confidence in the American economy and we will not be subject to the kind of volatility that occurred in that several-week period.
Okay, Mr. Searcy.
Yes. I want everybody to know that my portfolio didn't fluctuate much during what is inappropriately, I think, called Black Monday. I would like to name it something else, but we'll get to that when I get to Congress. Let me say that the budget deficit increased $31 billion alone in the last reporting period. That's fairly indicative of the fact that we as a nation are still not willing to deal with the tough problem that we face there. Also, I don't think we have the manifest recognition to understand that we didn't get in this situation overnight and we're not going to get out of it overnight. Now, what I've been saying throughout this campaign is that we need the economic redevelopment of downturn areas, not only in this congressional district, but across this country. The only solution ultimately to the problems of the deficit are the same solutions to the problems along Jefferson Street and the problems in downturn Robertson County.
Okay, let me say also we have more organizations than I've been given. We have the Donaldson Hermitage Chamber of Commerce represented here and the Metro Nashville Education Association as well. And if I missed anybody else, please let me know. While we were talking about the Black Monday and the stock market and the confidence, I noticed in the audience Mr. Sam Richmond, who is with the Owens School of Management, and I just wondered, Mr. Richmond, if you might stand and tell me whether you have just heard the solution to our economic problems here, or whether you might have any suggestion or question for any of the candidates.
No, I haven't, unfortunately, heard the solution. I do have a question. I'd like to ask them what they perceive as the relationship between these, quote, twin deficits. How does one affect the other, and what can we do about it?
Who should go first on this?
Mr. Clemens first.
Okay, thank you.
Well, there is a correlation, as Dean Richmond knows, between the budget deficits and the trade deficits. And I think we're tackling, and you got to tackle both at the same time. And if we can improve our trade deficit situation, then we'll be in a position to better improve our budget deficit situation, and we won't be sending shiploads of money overseas as we're doing now. And rather than losing these manufacturing industrial jobs, these bread and butter jobs that we're losing now, and yet the Reagan administration brags about all these new jobs being created, but between 1979 and 1984, 58% of those new jobs were minimum wage jobs, and I don't think that's moving us forward. And that's why I support a tough trade bill in order to achieve a better balance on our trade deficit so we can improve our budget deficit.
All right, Mr. Bredesen.
I think the two are obviously linked. One of the effects of our enormous budget deficit has been inflation and the high interest rates which come as a result of that. Those interest rates have made us less competitive overseas in a host of ways. They've caused us not to make investments in capital equipment, in plant and machinery that would make us more competitive in a host of ways. I think also it's deflected our attention very much to the short term, where we're not dealing with issues of education and of long-term changes in the kinds of goods that we produce that it's really going to take to solve that problem, which is now running, I guess, $17 billion a month.
Ms. Eskind, twin deficit problem.
There is an interrelationship, obviously, between the budget deficit and it affects the trade deficit. If we were competitive in the world market, we could change our local financial picture as well as our relationship with other governments. I think we have found ourselves becoming a debtor nation instead of a creditor nation. We are now exporting jobs instead of importing them. We're importing goods instead of exporting them. The health of our economy is definitely interrelated, and I think that what we need to be doing is focusing on the kinds of jobs and the kind of economy that we want in the next century, and be about training for those jobs and get our local house in order so that we can get our international house in order.
Okay, Ms. Searcy?
Yes. Clearly the relationship is one that's more than academic. It's a very real and live relationship. The fundamental solution, down and dirty in the easy sense, is the lack of productivity, ergo the lack of competitiveness that exists in our society today, must be reversed. Note with particular interest that we as a nation still, through CETO and other treaty alliances, for example, in this case the Southeast Atlantic Treaty Organization and some others, have a standing navy to protect Japan, yet Japan only has a National Guard to protect itself. So we are in fact subsidizing Japanese industry by providing it the kind of military protection that denigrates the domestic buildup of our own and the competitiveness of our own domestic commercial enterprises. That's just one of the many things that's out of kilt, and one of the many things that flows from not having a solid, comprehensive procedure to address this.
Let me add that the White House Area Chamber of Commerce is here today. The Girl Scouts of America are here today, and who else did I miss? Did I miss anybody now so I can recognize? The Environmental Council is here as well. Yes, ma'am. Who's the, what is that?
Political caucus.
Women's Political Caucus is here as well. Would the representative from the Junior League stand up, tell us who you are, and ask your question?
I'm Allison Phillips from the Nashville Junior League, and I'd like to ask this question of all the candidates. Recently, there was a bill introduced in Congress called the Act for Better Child Care. Basically, this would provide quality child care for low and moderate income families across the U.S. It would cost approximately $13 billion over the next 5 years. Tennessee would receive approximately $50 million and would be required to match 20% of this, or about $10 million. I'd like to know if you would support such a bill to require quality child care, and how would you fund it? Thank you.
All right. Let's start this time with Ms. Eskind.
I'm happy to start. The other day I made a statement at another event, at another forum, that I do support the bill. I not only support it, but I think that what I would like to see is a demonstration project in the 5th Congressional District. Let us take it one step at a time, begin here, get the kinks out on a small scale, and then fund and go with it nationally. I think it is important, and I think we must, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is in terms of our funding, I think that Congress must set priorities about what's important. And I think we can look at the defense budget and find money. I think we can look at enhancing small businesses and bringing new revenue into the economy. I think that we need to just set our priorities and not allow the president who talks about the homeless but doesn't fund housing, who talks about this but doesn't fund that. I think we need to make sure that we do not give to the president the line item veto so that he can establish priorities for us. I think we need to establish them for ourselves.
Let's have Mr. Searcy go next.
All right. I think the most fundamental question is how do you fund it? Because I think we all agree that it's necessary for the continuing integrity of the fabric of our society. All too many persons are literally precluded from productive employment because of the lack of child care. My wife works in the industry. She's the executive director of Bethlehem Center, which operates one of the largest daycare centers in this town. So I'm very sensitive to that. But I'm also sensitive to the funding side of the issue. And in part, this comes again from our reordering our budget priorities. And we can do that now. We don't have to raise any new revenues to understand that one F-15 replaces 1,600 teaching jobs at $25,000 a year in salaries. I mean, that's something we must recognize, particularly when the F-15 is in itself has some defense integrity of its own that's lacking. These are the kinds of things that we need to be prepared to do as a society to fund this kind of measure.
Mr. Clement?
Teddy, there's a real guilt trip on women in particular today about working and what's happening to their child. Much more with the woman, I think, than the man. And I do support legislation. I know they've got the House Education Labor Committee just approved a bill recently, the Job Protected Bill, because 2/3 of the women today that have children 3 years or less are having to work outside the home. 1/2 of all the women in the United States now work outside the home with children 1 year or less. So I favor tax incentives for employers to provide child care. I also support that bill in the House of Representatives that is there now, that's been voted out of the House Education and Labor Committee, the Job Protected Leave bill that will give 10 unpaid weeks of leave whereby the women are protected and get their jobs back, because 75 countries have moved in that direction. They're ahead of us.
Okay, Mr. Bredesen?
I